Police mocked a black woman, then discovered she was a federal judge officer. Rawlins pushed the revolver against Judge Eleanor Mitchell's head, causing blood to stream down her temple. "You're not so powerful anymore." He didn't know her true identity. And that might be her one advantage, she thought, as sirens screamed in the distance. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments section below before we get started on this startling tale. Click a star and like key and subscribe to become a part of our truth-seeking community. If you saw this injustice taking place in front of your eyes, how would you respond? Let's learn what caused this horrifying incident and how Judge Mitchell resisted a system that was intended to keep her quiet. After 20 years on the court, Judge Eleanor Mitchell had established herself as one of the Eastern District of Michigan's most esteemed federal judges. Even her infrequent detractors recognized her unflinching fairness and legal genius, which earned her recognition in her courtroom at the age of 53. However, courtrooms and legal actions were not the focus of today. Driving her humble Toyota vehicle, instead of her Mercedes, toward rural Michigan to visit her sister Patricia, Eleanor had exchanged her judicial robes for a pair of comfy trousers and a basic sweater. As she entered the small town of Westbrook, which she had frequently gone through but had hardly ever stopped in, the late afternoon sun cast deep shadows across the two-lane roadway. When flashing lights arrived in her rearview mirror, she was already thinking about the upcoming weekend. As she hummed along to a jazz classic, Eleanor instinctively checked her speedometer, confident that she had been driving consistently far within the speed limit. Nevertheless, she pulled to the shoulder, lowered her window, and put both hands on the steering wheel, as her father had instructed her to do decades earlier. With their hands visibly resting on their holstered firearms, two officers approached, one on either side of her car. Eleanor kept her composure despite the position appearing too hostile for a regular traffic stop. At her window, the cop, whose nameplate read Rawlins, leaned down with a look that showed no sign of professional decency. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed her appearance, a change in his manner that Eleanor instantly recognized from innumerable meetings throughout the course of her life. Officer Rawlins talked very slowly, as though he were speaking to someone who might not be familiar with English, registration, and license. The sudden order now had not even the appearance of deference. With composure, Eleanor said, "Good afternoon, officer. Could you tell me why I was stopped?" Bennett, whose nameplate was red, scoffed loudly as the second officer stood at the passenger window. Rawlins' expression grew stern. "In a 35, you were doing 40, registration and license. Or will there be an issue?" Eleanor realized what was happening in front of her, but she was positive that she had been driving exactly at the speed limit. In her courtroom, she had seen it innumerable times and heard the accounts of numerous black defendants whose ordinary traffic stops turned into something much darker. "I'm glad to share my information, officer, but I don't think I was speeding. Please provide your badge numbers as well." There was an instant response to this straightforward, legally permissible request. With a contortion of poorly disguised scorn, Rawlins drew closer. "Sweetheart, pay attention. You folks constantly cause problems by driving through areas that aren't appropriate for you. Why don't you focus more on following instructions and less on my badge?" The connotation of the phrase, "you people," was clear and hung in the air between them. Eleanor had seen those precise words in police reports and transcripts, and she had heard them in depositions and testimonies. She had served as a federal judge and had heard several civil rights cases where those two terms were used frequently. Decades of courtroom discipline served her well as she remained composed. "Officer Rawlins, I'll give you my license and registration, but I still need your badge number and your partner's." Officer Bennett smirked as he walked around to join his partner. "Here, Jason, we have a lawyer for ourselves. Be careful." Rawlins laughed at the completely unfunny sound. No, honey, she probably just watches a lot of those police dramas. Eleanor slowly groped for her identification in her purse on the passenger seat. Bennett yelled, "She's reaching for something weapon right now." With startling rapidity, the scene descended into mayhem. Both officers pulled out their guns, wrenched open Eleanor's door, and violently pulled her out of her car. They swung her around and smashed her against the side of her car, causing her shoulder to strain violently. Rollins tightened the handcuffs needlessly, and the cold metal cut into her wrists. As he rummaged through her pocketbook, Bennett added, "Looks like we got resisting arrest and threatening an officer now." His voice carried a touch of satisfaction. "Nice car for someone like you," he said, opening her wallet and whistling. "From where did you steal it?" Eleanor experienced a similar wave of outrage, but she focused it on paying close attention. She had honed the ability to mentally capture details under pressure during her career, which had come in handy throughout difficult trials. She now enumerated every offensive remark, procedural infraction, and overreaction. She purposefully chose not to disclose that she was a federal judge. This was done to record how these police acted when they believed they were interacting with a normal black lady, not to use her position of authority to avoid abuse. Eleanor saw a youngster in the passenger seat of a passing automobile, holding out a phone that was clearly recording the incident. As the car slowed as it got closer to the scene, when Officer Bennett saw it, he quickly stopped looking through her possessions and marched toward the car, yelling at them to stop. Despite the fact that the car sped off, Eleanor mentally stored the license plate number as possible proof. While making racially offensive remarks under his breath, Rollins steered her roughly in the direction of the patrol car. Nice luxury purse for an automobile. How you can afford these things never ceases to astound me. It must be an excellent job. The inference that any black person with nice possessions must have gotten them unlawfully was obvious. While the shackles sank painfully into her wrists and the truth of what was occurring hung over her like a thick cloak, Eleanor stayed mute, watching and remembering. She was being detained for the terrible crime of being black in a place where policemen Rollins and Bennett had determined she didn't belong, not for any real wrongdoing. With the Toyota still stopped on the side of the road, Eleanor gazed out at her as they loaded her into the back of the police cruiser, reflecting on the irony of her decision to drive the more modest of her cars today. She believed their suspicions of stealing would have been considerably stronger if she had been in her Mercedes. When the cruiser departed, Eleanor was taken to the Westbrook police station for an interaction that would reveal a level of depravity she could never have imagined. Water-stained ceiling tiles and damaged linoleum flooring were accompanied by murky, fluorescent lighting that gave the Westbrook police station a sickly, pale appearance, as if it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The vintage white's only sign on display as what seemed to be an office decoration, framed as though it were a treasured historical artifact rather than a disgraceful relic. And the Confederate flag coffee mug on one desk were among the more disturbing details Eleanor noted, with the same meticulous attention to detail that she gave to the station's interior. Other uniformed staff, who hardly looked up from their job, gave her disdainful looks as the officers escorted her through a processing area. The fact that no one objected to seeing a middle-aged woman in handcuffs being shoddily led to the detention cells suggests that this was not an uncommon sight in Westbrook. Only after being thrown in a small holding cell with two other black detainees did Eleanor's handcuffs come off. With a finality Eleanor had heard about in her courts but had never experienced herself, the steel door clanged shut. She moved her focus to her cellmates and touched her wrists, observing the red lines left by the two tight cuffs. The younger woman, who looked to be in her late 20s, sat with her arms folded tightly across her chest on one of the two benches in the cage. The young man, scarcely older than a teenager, paced the cramped room with anxious vigor. Eleanor purposefully left out her title while introducing herself, stating just Eleanor. The young woman raised her eyes cautiously. Finally, she said, "My name is Tasha. It's Marcus. He was just brought in ahead of you." Tasha's story came to life in stumbling syllables, interspersed with sour laughs that lacked any sense of humor, even though Tasha had a ticket for the tiny bottle of perfume in her shopping bag. The proprietor of the neighborhood boutique accused her of shoplifting while she was there. Tasha was handcuffed by Officer Rollins as soon as he answered the phone. Without examining her receipt or getting her version of events, Marcus was in a similar predicament. The 19-year-old was waiting for his transportation in the parking lot after finishing his job at the neighborhood grocery shop when Officer Bennett came up to him and demanded to know why he was just hanging around. Marcus was handcuffed and taken inside for questionable conduct and possible trespassing. Even though he had displayed his job badge and clarified that he was waiting for his mother to come get him. Without disclosing her stance, Eleanor listened intently and occasionally asked questions that drew on her decades of legal experience. She pointed out that the police, the presumption of guilt, and the disdain for rights were all identical in their accounts. Above all, she identified the growing trend, which she had observed in many civil rights cases during her career. The sound of heavy footsteps approaching the jail cut off their discourse. Officers Rollins and Bennett arrived on either side of a big man with the name Hargrove embroidered on his uniform and a sheriff's star on his chest. He appeared to be in his late 50s based on his weathered face and salt-and-pepper hair, and his position of power was evident from the way the other officers bowed to him. He regarded the three prisoners with open disdain. "What do we have here?" A hectic day in Westbrook. His eyes narrowed slightly as they focused on Eleanor. "I take it that you are the one causing my officers difficulties during a routine traffic stop?" Eleanor firmly looked into his eyes. "Chief Hargrove, I want to make my phone call." When she mentioned his name, which she had read off his uniform, the police chief's eyebrows raised a little. He claimed that phone calls were a privilege rather than a right. Although Eleanor was well aware that this was untrue. Also, it appears that we are experiencing some computer problems today. Processing your documents could take some time. To Officer Rollins he turned. Rollins grinned. "What are the charges again?" "After we conclude the report, there may be more instances of speeding, resisting arrest, and disrespecting an officer." Chief Hargrove gave a nod as if these fabricated accusations were completely legitimate. "It appears that you will be staying with us for the night. Judge Crawford's court date is set for tomorrow afternoon." In order to complete the puzzle that was taking shape in her mind, Eleanor stored away the judge's name. She calmly reiterated that she had the right to call and that the accusations made by Officer Rollins were untrue. "Even though his behavior has been completely unprofessional, I have been courteous throughout this interaction. And I wasn't speeding or resisting arrest." Her calm rejoinder caused a little flush to appear on Chief Hargrove's face. "When we get to your phone call, we'll answer it. First, the paperwork." He then turned, leaving Officers Bennett and Rollins to smile smugly behind him. Eleanor went back to the bench to think about what she had just seen. Even as someone who had presided over hundreds of civil rights cases, the casual disregard for legal procedure was astounding. Returning her focus to Tasha and Marcus, she studied the station closely through the bars of the cell, gaining more information. Eleanor became aware of a number of unsettling information throughout the course of the following several hours. The station's photos showed Chief Hargrove standing with well-dressed individuals who looked like local authorities and business owners at numerous community events. He stood boldly next to a man wearing judicial robes in one particularly telling picture, who was probably Judge Crawford, the man he had referenced. Eleanor overheard Officer Bennett discussing their monthly targets with another officer during a shift change. He mentioned that they were concentrating on the Oak Lane area and that those individuals needed to understand their place. Most revealingly, Bennett told the other officer that since Crawford always supports us, whatever arrests they made would be upheld. Observing Eleanor's concentrated focus on the cops, Tasha leaned forward and murmured quietly, "This is a common occurrence here. Last month, my cousin was pulled over 3 times in a single week. Just harassing, no tickets. They are attempting to frighten us away from our houses." Both Tasha and Marcus provided fragments of a longer story that presented an unsettling picture when Eleanor pressed for clarification. Police were systematically targeting the historically black Oak Lane community, where people were intimidated and frequently stopped for minor or non-existent code violations. At the same time, a significant development project headed by a man by the name of Victor Crane was purchasing local real estate at a discount to market value. Marcus said, "My grandmother received an offer that was half the value of her house. Even though she has owned the same garden for 20 years, she was fined for neglecting it when she abruptly refused to sell." As she took in the facts, Eleanor noticed a pattern that she had previously observed in housing discrimination cases. In the 4th hour of the arrest, a young cop Eleanor had never seen before came to the cell. He was identified by his nameplate as Officer Daniels, and his manner was very different from the other's professional manner, without the hint of animosity. He opened the door of the cell. "Daniel, Mitchell, and Miss Daniels, I have to process your information right now." Eleanor trailed him to a reservation counter where he started inputting her information into a computer. He stopped, his fingers hanging over the keyboard, as he got to her occupation. He glanced up at her, then down at her ID, his eyes widening. "You are Federal Eastern District Court Judge Eleanor Mitchell." Eleanor could see the color fading from his face as his voice had become a whisper. Once her look remained calm. She nodded. Officer Daniels got to his feet right away. "Please pardon me, Your Honor." He quickly vanished into what looked to be Chief Hargrove's workspace. The station's atmosphere drastically changed in a matter of minutes. And what happens when individuals who misuse power find out their victim has more power than they thought? In a matter of seconds, the Westbrook police station's attitude went from smug superiority to barely controlled panic as the identity of Judge Eleanor Mitchell was revealed. Officer Daniels followed Chief Hargrove as he bounded out of his office, his once disdainful face replaced by a facade of forced sociability that was unable to hide the terror underneath. "Judge Mitchell." He made the announcement loud enough for everyone in the station to hear, as if he were performing for his subordinates. But it seems that there was an unfortunate mistake. In stark contrast to his prior manner, there was a forced joviality in his voice. "We were unaware of your role. I was recently made aware of this unfortunate mistake by Officer Daniels." Eleanor watched the chief's performance with the same detached look she had worn in her courtroom when the chief's testimony was most questionable. She didn't try to soothe the man's mounting pain at the processing counter, where he had been quite content to violate her civil rights only minutes before. Officers Rollins and Bennett emerged behind Chief Hargrove, their faces showing differing levels of astonishment and anxiety as they came to terms with the identity of the woman they had abused and ridiculed. Rollins' granite face was only broken by a nervous tick at the corner of his eye, and Bennett's complexion had greatly paled. "This entire problem could have been averted if you had simply introduced yourself from the outset," Rollins tried, his voice losing its prior haughtiness. The inference was unmistakable and abhorrent. Rather than being innate to all people, constitutional rights were contingent on one's position. After more than 20 years of earning respect in federal courtrooms, Eleanor finally spoke with the measured power that had come to define her voice. No citizen, regardless of status, should have to endure the treatment I did. While carefully recording every response, every hurried glance between cops, and every attempt at damage control, she continued her purposeful policy of minimum contact, disclosing nothing of her intentions. Around her, the station was a flurry of activity, officers quickly cleaning desks of Confederate paraphernalia and fixing their uniforms. The long-awaited paperwork appeared out of nowhere as Officer Daniels nervously processed her release documents. Eleanor noticed that Chief Hargrove's phone seemed to be ringing non-stop, and that he had repeatedly assured someone that the problem was under control and being handled properly. The most telling was when, some 20 minutes after her identification was made public, a silver-haired man in a pricey suit rushed through the station doors. Even before he presented himself, his dominating presence and the instant deference of Chief Hargrove made him a prominent figure in the community. "Judge Mitchell, I am Judge Samuel Crawford of Westbrook County." Eleanor noted the thick signet ring and well-groomed nails that spoke of status and power as he offered his hand, which she momentarily shook. "As soon as I learned of this regrettable tragedy, I arrived. I sincerely apologize for any confusion this may have caused. You may be confident that at Westbrook, we take these issues very seriously." Judge Crawford's eyes, which remained calculating as he evaluated the possible harm to himself and his colleagues, never met the trained smile. "Maybe we could have a private conversation in my rooms. We can definitely find a discreet solution to this problem." From one legal expert to another, Eleanor remained strategically silent, merely acknowledging his presence without committing to anything, and asked that her personal possessions be returned. She observed intently as Officer Bennett took her purse out of an evidence locker, making an effort to covertly rearrange its contents in an effort to eliminate any indication of their prior rough treatment and search. Eleanor saw an incident that supported her suspicions about the systemic nature of the discrimination in Westbrook, while she awaited the completion of her release paperwork. She watched through the glass doors of the station as two officers escorted an older black man in handcuffs, their violent handling and loud, degrading remarks about an alleged code violation at his home robbing him of his dignity. When the officers entered the station and saw Judge Crawford there with Eleanor, they paused for a time, obviously unsure of how to handle their usual detainee treatment when they would be subject to court scrutiny. Judge Crawford swiftly indicated that they should enter by a side door, revealing that these kinds of station entries are standard. Since my cell phone's battery expired, Eleanor's only request during the release process was to use the station's phone. By using carefully coded language that would seem harmless to anyone listening, she was able to call her court clerk, David, and start a covert investigation through channels that would not notify local authorities. "I'll be taking my time going over the Hampton discrimination briefs, David. Please start looking into recent instances of this type in rural counties, especially those involving property disputes and traffic stops in traditionally black communities." David, too, who was familiar with her systematic approach to situations, would recognize that she was pointing out a discriminatory tendency that needed to be looked into. With an obedient smile that barely concealed his desperation, Chief Hargrove made a last-ditch effort to repair the damage as Eleanor was ready to leave the station. He offered to personally transport her anywhere she needed to go. "That will not be required," Eleanor said, keeping the cool head that had gotten her through the whole ordeal. "I like to drive myself." Although it was early, the chief's relief at her seeming acceptance of the situation was evident. Judge Crawford lowered his voice to a near whisper as he fell into step with her as she headed for the exit. "Judge Mitchell, I sincerely hope we can keep this between us. Despite occasionally lacking the expertise of federal authorities, many small-town departments have good intentions. Our already overburdened municipal resources would only be further taxed by a formal complaint." Eleanor looked him in the eye, her face showing no signs of contemplation. Judge Crawford: I will definitely give this occurrence the attention it merits. His brief satisfaction at her tactful reply demonstrated how thoroughly he misinterpreted her motives and nature. Have you ever seen someone in a position of authority misuse their influence only to find out later that they chose the wrong person to mess with? In the comments, type number 1. What would you do if you were Judge Mitchell? And you think she should seek justice for everyone who has been harmed by this crooked system, not just herself? Would you take advantage of the chance to reveal a systemic issue, or would you only utilize your power to solve your individual mistreatment? If you would want to see more tales of courageous people resisting corruption, please like and subscribe. Judge Mitchell is going to employ a tactic that will rock Westbrook to its core. And the narrative is about to take an unforeseen turn. What will she do next, in your opinion? The disarray of the police station Eleanor had just left was a sharp contrast to Patricia Mitchell's modest two-story house on the outskirts of Westbrook. Although the sisters had always been different, Patricia preferred grassroots activism and community organizing, while Eleanor pursued the more regimented route of law. They continued to be fervently supportive of one another's endeavors. Patricia saw right once that something was amiss when Eleanor showed up, still wearing the pants and sweater that had been rumpled from hours spent in a jail. What happened, Ellie? As she led her sister inside, she inquired. Eleanor meticulously recalled the day's events, demonstrating her judicial training by her accurate recall of utterances, times, and observations. Patricia nodded periodically, as if Eleanor were only reiterating what she already knew, and listened with increasing rage but little surprise. After Eleanor was done, Patricia vanished into her home office and reappeared with a laptop and a huge binder marked Westbrook Documentation. Ellie, you're not the first, not even close. Over the course of the following 2 hours, Patricia's revelations changed Eleanor's perception of what had happened to her from a singular instance of discrimination to a part of a much more sinister and extensive pattern. Patricia had been painstakingly recording instances of racial prejudice in Westbrook for 3 years, with a special emphasis on the historically Black Oak Lane district. Numerous interviews, notarized photos of dubious police encounters, statistical analyses demonstrating disproportionate arrest rates for black residents, and records of property seizures and code enforcement actions that nearly exclusively targeted non-white homeowners were all included in her binder. When Patricia's laptop opened, a map of Westbrook with the Oak Lane area marked appeared. Former sharecroppers who relocated north in the 1920s created this neighborhood, which has been inhabited by black families ever since. The majority of these families have been homeowners for several generations. She selected a different screen that displayed real estate transactions throughout the previous 5 years. Take note of this trend. In Oak Lane, Crane Developments has been purchasing homes at significantly lower prices than the going rate. Also, have a look at the properties they have purchased. The screen displayed a distinct pattern of well-timed transactions that resulted in a patchwork of neighborhood ownership. Eleanor saw the ramifications instantly. Holdouts are being forced to sell as a result of internal development pressure. Patricia gave a somber nod. And you know who puts that pressure on them. As she turned to the police interaction section of her notebook, she saw scores of instances in which residents of Oak Lane had been the target of arbitrary traffic stops, suspicious arrests, and overzealous code enforcement. With Officer Rollins and Bennett prominently featured in numerous stories, the pattern was evident. Residents are harassed by the police until it is intolerable to live here. In the meantime, code infractions frequently accumulate for problems that remain unresolved in white communities. Liens are imposed on homeowners. properties when they are unable to pay the growing fees. Eleanor's analytical mind was already making connections as she absorbed this information with increasing indignation. Judge Crawford Patricia's face became stern, approves of everything. Eviction rejects accusations against police and imposes property liens. All of this is made possible by him. The judicial rubber stamp. Eleanor told her clerk the contents of her coded communication, stating that she had begun a preliminary inquiry into Westbrook's discriminatory practices. However, anecdotal proof alone won't suffice. We require proof of direct communication between this developer Crane, the court, and the police. After a moment of hesitation, Patricia disclosed the last piece of evidence she had been hesitant to provide. Ellie, there's more to it. I've been working on a case, but no lawyer will take it on. After being reported for ethics violations by Judge Crawford, the final attorney to attempt to contest Crane's actions inexplicably found himself facing disbarment procedures. In order to preserve his career, he dropped the case. Eleanor's fears regarding the extent of corruption in Westbrook were validated by this revelation. That night, Eleanor did some preliminary research on Patricia's computer while she was preparing dinner. She was able to look more closely at Westbrook's legal past because of her federal credentials, which allowed her access to databases that are normally inaccessible to the general public. Her findings presented a troubling image. Judge Crawford's court has dismissed all complaints against the Westbrook Police Department during the previous 10 years. In contrast, code enforcement actions against Oak Lane properties had surged 400%, whereas those in communities with a higher concentration of white residents had decreased. Most tellingly, she discovered financial documents that demonstrated Crane Developments made significant contributions to the Westbrook Police Foundation, a purportedly non-profit group that Chief Hargrove himself chairs, as well as Judge Crawford's re-election campaign. An emergency conference was in progress at Judge Crawford's private home across town, while Eleanor continued her inquiry. The tension was evident when Chief Hargrove officers Rawlins, Bennett, and Victor Crane himself convened in the judge's study with wood panels to discuss their predicament. For heaven's sake, Victor Crane, a federal judge, was pacing the room in barely controlled rage. The property developer was in his early 60s, well-dressed, and exuded the self-assurance of someone used to winning. Are you aware of how much scrutiny this could put on our project? 6 months before construction on Oak Lane Square began, Judge Crawford made an effort to appear composed and authoritative despite his evident nervousness. She departed without formally complaining. It seems to me that she just wants to move on from this regrettable experience. Chief Hargrove seems less certain. From the station, she called someone. Something regarding study and examples of discrimination sounded to me like lawyers talking. The group's most obviously irritated member, Officer Rawlins, interrupted. "We have to go past this. Who knows what she might discover if she digs? Before she accuses anyone, we should discredit her." Bennett gave a nod of assent. During the traffic stop, we could say that she was intoxicated. She behaved erratically. Judge Crawford nodded slowly in consideration of this proposition. "I'm connected to the state court system. Judge Mitchell's stability might be called into question if she made a few discreet calls, implying that she was acting inappropriately in our jurisdiction." The pragmatic Crane ever added, "I can ask my contacts in the media to write articles about the frame of judicial overreach. Any charges she makes are motivated by personal animosity. Samuel, you will be officially documented as having attempted to contact her in a professional manner." But she declined a sensible conversation, unaware that Eleanor had foreseen this precise reaction and had previously taken preventative action. The guys carried on planning late into the night. She had scheduled a thorough medical test at Westbrook Community Hospital prior to leaving the police station, proving she had not been drunk and pointing out the tangible signs of excessively tight handcuffs. Having committed the license plate to memory, she had also contacted the teenager who had captured a portion of her arrest. They had found the teenage witness, obtaining a copy of the film, demonstrating the officer's inappropriate behavior, thanks to Patricia's connections in the neighborhood. At the kitchen table, Eleanor and Patricia worked out their own plan, creating a holistic strategy that would not only remedy Eleanor's abuse, but also maybe deliver justice to a whole community that had endured years of institutionalized discrimination. Eleanor was aware that she would be up against not just one bad actor, but a well-established crooked system with strong defenders in the days ahead, necessitating the use of all her legal knowledge and strategic thinking. She was ready for the battle that lay ahead, not just for herself, but also for Tasha Marcus and innumerable others who had experienced the same kind of bigotry without the federal title's protection. Eleanor's worries regarding the extent of the conspiracy were validated when the well-planned attack started precisely the following morning. The headline, "Federal Judge Detained After Erratic Driving Officials Concerned About Behavior," on the front page of the Westbrook Gazette, provided little opportunity for nuance. According to anonymous police sources quoted in the article, Judge Eleanor Mitchell had been stopped for reckless driving and had been hostile toward cops who were trying to take advantage of her position to avoid punishment. In a well-crafted statement, Chief Hargrove conveyed his profound disappointment that a well-respected federal judge would act so impolitely while in our city. Judge Crawford, who was frequently quoted, expressed alarm about growing examples of federal encroachment into local affairs, while delivering platitudes about how no one is above the law. Over breakfast at Patricia's place, Eleanor read the article calmly, her face showing no sign of the righteous rage she felt. Patricia was less calm. Character assassination, followed by methodical isolation, is their blueprint. Watch out. They'll target your sister next. Patricia's forecast came true with startling rapidity. Patricia was notified of several construction code infractions at the community center by mid-morning. Even though the facility had passed inspection only 3 months prior, she operated violations that had inexplicably appeared overnight. If the notice's unidentified serious safety hazards weren't resolved, it would close in 48 hours. In the meantime, colleagues in the federal court system who had seen the news reports called Eleanor with growing anxiety. While some more politically connected judges advised she settle the case quietly to prevent institutional disgrace, the majority indicated support, but cautious caution. By the afternoon, Eleanor found out that Marcus and Tasha were being directly retaliated against. Tasha sobbed as she called Patricia to tell her that police had come to her place of employment to talk with her manager in private. Despite 3 years of excellent performance ratings, she was fired for being unreliable within hours. Marcus had been imprisoned once more, this time on suspicion of selling marijuana, a charge so obviously false that his bail was set at a sum his family could never afford, guaranteeing that he would remain in custody and unable to verify Eleanor's story of their joint incarceration. When Eleanor first complained to state authorities about Westbrook's police behavior, she was confronted with bureaucratic delays and requests for further documentation, indicating that the corruption was not limited to the town. This put Eleanor's strategic patience to the test. It was clear that Judge Crawford's ties within the state court system were being tapped, resulting in institutional opposition to her initiatives. That afternoon, Patricia and Eleanor met with civil rights lawyer Damon Reynolds in his small office 30 miles from Westbrook. Far enough away to keep Crawford's network from spotting them immediately away. Reynolds, a devoted lawyer in his early 40s who had fought discrimination lawsuits all of his professional life, appeared worn out as he went over the material they had collected. He pointed to a wall of folders marked with dates and case names, indicating 23 distinct cases of blatant civil rights abuses that had all been deconstructed due to witness intimidation, evidence tampering, or judicial dismissal. "I've been trying to build cases against Westbrook for 7 years, he acknowledged. Affidavits, court transcripts, and images were scattered around Reynolds' desk as he pulled out multiple files. "I defended a black company owner 3 years ago when their property was taken due to false health code violations. After making statements at first, witnesses abruptly withdrew them, saying they had been misinterpreted. For lack of evidence, Judge Crawford dismissed the case. 5 traffic stops that were exactly like Eleanor's, complete with comparable accusations of defying arrest and showing disrespect to cops, were documented in another file. Crawford dismissed all of the cases and referred the lawyers who filed the allegations to disciplinary action. Reynolds gazed at Eleanor with renewed resolve, in spite of her past setback. However, none of my prior clients were federal judges who were familiar with their strategies. That makes all the difference. Hargrove and Crawford became increasingly uneasy as Eleanor used her government credentials and relationships wisely, working through reliable routes to gather resources in secret while keeping a low profile. She set up safe federal storage for all of Patricia's gathered evidence, guarding against possible local authorities seizing or destroying it. Through a former clerk who is currently employed at the Department of Justice, she made contact with the Civil Rights Division, offering first information regarding possible discriminatory trends without submitting a formal complaint. Above all, she avoided the already compromised local channels by setting up a private meeting with the State Attorney General's office. Eleanor methodically presented the information to 2 senior investigators during the encounter, which was held in a secret conference room at a federal office in Detroit. They gave a validating but worrisome reaction. Sliding a tiny file across the table, Deputy Attorney General Lawrence Chen acknowledged that we had known about issues in Westbrook for a while. "In the last 2 years, our office has received 3 complaints, but before we could develop cases, witnesses withdrew their statements." Senior investigator Monica Patterson, his colleague, was blunter. "We think there is a lot of corruption in Westbrook, Judge Mitchell, but we haven't been able to get past what seems to be a closed system. Due of his strong political ties, Judge Crawford has impeded earlier inquiries." Eleanor was aware of the implicit message that political barriers prevented even the State Attorney General's office from taking on the deeply ingrained corruption. This insight only made her more determined to create a strong argument that would stand up to legal challenges and political pressure. An anonymous text message that evening from an unexpected source offered Eleanor a possible breakthrough. "We're not all in favor of what's taking place. We must speak." Midnight in the courthouse parking lot. Patricia was worried about a possible trap, but Eleanor understood that building inner sources was essential. Eleanor met the sender of the message, who turned out to be Cop Daniels, the young cop who had initially noticed her at the station after taking some measures, such as moving to a more public spot and having Attorney Reynolds stand close by as a witness. Daniels, who was clearly anxious yet resolute, disclosed that he had only been with the Westbrook Police Department for 8 months after graduating from the school with lofty goals for community service. He said, scarcely raising his voice above a whisper in spite of the empty parking lot, "What I've seen since then keeps me awake at night." A straight pipeline connects Hargrove, Crawford, and Crane. Under the guise of community betterment, black residents are being harassed in a systematic manner until they give up and sell to Crane for whatever price he offers. Daniels offered to supply vital inside information, such as allegedly lost dashboard camera footage, internal communications demonstrating intentional targeting of Oak Lane homeowners, and financial records demonstrating that cops were rewarded for making arrests and seizing property in the district. When he disclosed that his own grandmother had lost her house in a comparable development project in a different town years prior, it became evident why he was acting. "But I must be protected," he argued. "I won't simply lose my job if they think I'm speaking to you. These individuals pose a threat." Eleanor acknowledged that Daniels might have the key to opening the case, and she promised suitable protections through federal witness programs if his information proved substantive. Eleanor thought about how quickly things had escalated as she drove back to Patricia's house that evening. What started out as a discriminatory traffic stop turned out to be a plot involving officials from several levels of local government that had an impact on hundreds of lives. She felt a great deal of responsibility, but she also relished the unique chance her job gave her to confront structural injustice that would otherwise go unpunished. She had learned patience and diligence from her judicial training. However, it appeared that they might not have the luxury of time given the increasing pressure on witnesses like Tasha and Marcus, as well as the threatening notice on Patricia's community center. Patricia was waiting with information that supported her evaluation when she got to her sister's residence. According to her bleak report, the community center will undergo an emergency safety check tomorrow morning. Additionally, I have learned that Crane Developments, who recently purchased 3 houses on Oak Lane through tax liens, has applied for accelerated demolition permits. Eleanor's presence and first research were the obvious reasons for the quickening of their timeline, in order to complete as much of their plan as possible before possible interventions could be put into place. The conspirators were acting rapidly, knowing that their opponents had the finances, political connections, and willingness to utilize intimidation techniques that gave them a major edge. Eleanor and Patricia worked through the night to finalize their plan for the impending conflict, the truth, the law, and the resolve of those battling not only for themselves, but also for the right of an entire community to exist without discrimination, were what they lacked. Eleanor reminded herself. Eleanor knew that the days ahead would put her legal knowledge, strategic thinking, and inner bravery to the test when she finally retired to Patricia's guest bedroom. When corrupt officials know someone has the capacity to expose them, how far will they go to defend their position of authority? As the struggle between Judge Eleanor Mitchell and Westbrook's power structure intensified into more perilous area, the answer became tragically obvious. Eleanor saw a dark automobile parked across from Patricia's house the morning after her encounter with Officer Daniels. The driver was not trying to hide his monitoring. The same car kept a constant distance, its presence a clear intimidation technique, as she went to the Oak Lane area later that day to talk to locals impacted by the discriminatory behaviors. That evening, unidentified individuals broke Patricia's front glass with a brick wrapped in paper that read, "Mind your own business," committing more overt harassment against her home. Officers arrived almost 2 hours after Patricia's complaint, gave a brief inspection, and then suggested that neighborhood children were probably to blame. The local police reaction was noticeably slow. The next day, both women started receiving threatening phone calls from untraceable numbers, with voices that were disguised but conveyed the same message: drop it or suffer consequences. Refusing to let her inquiry be derailed, Eleanor meticulously recorded each episode, adding it to the expanding body of evidence. Judge Crawford himself accosted Eleanor in an empty hallway when she went to the county courthouse to look over public documents pertaining to Oak Lane property transfers. His strategy, which alternated between covert threats and promises of professional civility, was a master study in judicial doublespeak. He started his practice smile without ever looking into his icy eyes, saying, "I've always had the greatest respect for federal jurists. Naturally, our areas of operation, jurisdictions and interests are distinct." He lowered his voice and took a step closer. "Do you agree that co-workers should respect one another's territory? When boundaries are blurred, it causes needless problems for all parties." Crawford changed strategies when Eleanor continued to act indifferently, refusing to acknowledge his theory or disclose her intentions. "I am aware that you have been asking questions concerning specific Westbrook real estate issues. I might be able to save you a lot of time and work by providing some local context, professional civility between judges, perhaps over supper." In a cautiously neutral response, Eleanor thanked him for his concern, but made no promises. No pretense of collegiality remained after Crawford's final remark. "I would hate to see a distinguished career ruined by small-town miscommunications. Despite appearances, the judicial community is small, and reputations can be readily tarnished." As he left, the implication of danger lingered, giving Eleanor complete confidence in the extent of the depravity she was facing. When Eleanor learned that her federal office had been broken into and that some case files, particularly those pertaining to housing discrimination and civil rights violations, were missing, the situation became much more serious. Despite the fact that the stolen materials were targeted, the official inquiry classified it as a random burglary. Officer Rawlins intentionally targeted bedroom windows with his patrol car parked right outside Patricia's home floodlights that same evening. He continued to harass her hourly throughout the night by turning on spotlights and sirens beneath her bed. The pretense of routine patrols, when Victor Crane himself orchestrated an apparently coincidental encounter with Eleanor at Westbrook's sole high-end eating establishment, where she was dining with Patricia and Attorney Reynolds. The intimidation escalated to new heights. Crane strode over to their table with the assurance of one who is used to buying anything or anybody he wants. "Judge Mitchell, you are a welcome surprise. Crane, Victor." Eleanor shook his hand momentarily without getting up. "I'm aware that you have been interested in the progress of our small community. Speaking with someone of your caliber about my outlook for Westbrook's future always makes me happy." He took a chair from a nearby table and sat down without waiting for an invitation. "My foundation contributes significantly to a number of philanthropic projects. We are constantly searching for organizations that deserve our support. Maybe you have a special place in your heart. Scholarship programs for deserving law students and retirement funds for federal judges. A casual mention to regrettable misunderstandings with local law enforcement that could undoubtedly be cleared up by reasoned conversations with community leaders followed the attempted bribe, which was thinly disguised as philanthropic concern. Eleanor did not directly challenge the incorrect offer or accept it, which was a measured response. "Clayton, Mr. Crane, thank you for your interest in the community. We were just finished our meal, if you will pardon us." With a sly smirk that indicated he thought financial incentives could eventually fix any possible issues, Crane left. Eleanor realized that her inquiry had sufficiently upended Westbrook's power structure to force the guy who eventually benefited from the discriminatory practices to directly intervene. After this escalation, Eleanor made a calculated move by implying to Patricia, in a conversation in her house, which they now believed was being watched, that maybe they ought to re-evaluate their strategy. "This is getting more complicated than I thought it would be," she remarked, convincingly exhausted. "My direct engagement is problematic due to jurisdictional issues. Maybe we ought to take a step back and think about other possibilities." The goal of this seeming retreat was accomplished, giving the conspirators a fictitious sense of security. Eleanor continued to develop her case by working with reliable detectives to record the harassment using private federal channels that local police are unable to access. She also assisted Marcus Tasher and other victims in preparing testimonies regarding their experiences and pressed. Additional jurisdictional power for possible federal intervention was provided by her study, which showed that Crane's development projects included federal grant money intended for community improvement. Most importantly, Officer Daniels demonstrated his worth as an informant by supplying vital evidence such as internal emails that specifically addressed population adjustment tactics for Eleanor's dashboard camera footage from Oak Lane, arrests that were purportedly erased, and financial records that revealed direct payments from Crane Developments to a consulting firm owned by Chief Hargrove's brother-in-law. The Oak Lane district's heightened enforcement measures were exactly in line with these payments. Because they thought Eleanor was giving in, the conspirators felt more confident and accelerated their plans. Patricia was formally informed that her community center will be closed in 48 hours after failing its safety inspection. The non-profit organization could not afford the tens of thousands of dollars required to correct the many violations listed in the paper. Even more concerning was the fact that the notice was accompanied by a demolition application that Judge Crawford's court had already granted, in part, meaning the structure had been planned for demolition even before an inspection was conducted. This bold action demonstrated that Crane's development ambitions were moving forward at a quick pace, with the community center serving as the last major barrier to total authority over the Oak Lane district. Eleanor realized they could no longer afford the luxury of a protracted investigation as she went over the fabricated inspection reports. The community she was attempting to safeguard was clearly in danger due to Westbrook's corruption, which necessitated swift and firm action. Do you think dishonest public servants, even those in high positions, should be held accountable? If you believe that everyone should be held accountable, regardless of status, type number 1 in the comments section. This narrative demonstrates how discrimination is carried out by coordinated systems of power as well as by individual acts. If you would like to see more content that highlights injustice and honors individuals who are courageous enough to oppose it, please like and subscribe. What do you think will happen next when Judge Mitchell gets ready to set her trap on Westbrook's corrupt power structure? Will her meticulous preparation be sufficient to overthrow the long-standing discriminatory system, or will those in charge be shielded by strong connections? Her scheme is about to enter its most perilous stage. To the untrained eye, the most hazardous chess moves can look like retreats. Judge Eleanor Mitchell masterminded this lie when she declared in public that she would not be involved in any Westbrook-related concerns because of her regrettable miscommunication with the local police. In the official declaration made public via the appropriate legal channels, she stated that in light of her recent encounter with Westbrook authorities, she wanted to avoid giving the impression that she was biased. This declaration was a resounding triumph confirmation to Judge Crawford Chief Hargrove and Victor Crane's conspiratorial power structure that their intimidation strategies had been successful in getting a federal judge to resign. Almost immediately the party started. Chief Hargrove showed there with a pricey bottle of scotch and a smug smirk when Judge Crawford called an unplanned party at his opulent house. She would fold, I told you. After we put some pressure on him, he claimed that he had poured copious amounts of drinks for Crawford and Victor Crane, who had just arrived in his usual chauffeur-driven luxury automobile. Crane made a mocking toast with his glass. Crawford laughed, stirring the amber liquid to federal judges who understand their role. She's more intelligent than I realized and knew when a battle was lost. None of them understood that Eleanor's public recusal was the first step in a well-planned plan to provide them the exact illusion of security they now experienced. Eleanor had already installed advanced recording equipment in places where the conspirators were likely to gather, such as Crawford's home study, Hargrove's office, and the private room at Westbrook Country Club where Crane conducted his business meetings, working with dependable federal marshals who worked outside of local channels. The second part of her strategy was to set up conditions that would encourage the conspirators to publicly discuss their plan, thinking they were safe from criticism. Eleanor used protected federal channels to get a well-written piece into legal journals, implying that a significant Justice Department inquiry into housing discrimination in small towns had been put on hold indefinitely because of jurisdictional issues and resource limitations. Federal authorities will be concentrating on large urban centers rather than isolated rural events, according to the piece that purportedly discussed national budget goals. Eleanor's official recusal and this misleading information made it the ideal situation for the conspirators to relax. The tactic worked better than Eleanor had anticipated. Within days of the article's release, recording devices captured a meeting between the three main conspirators, during which they talked about their corrupt partnership's 15-year history as well as the present Oak Lane development plot. Judge Crawford relaxed due to his accomplishment, and they shared memories of their initial partnership over a few glasses of scotch, recalled the property of Old Man Wilson, the first black physician in Westbrook who believed he was untouchable due to his medical degree. Before he gave up, "How many health code violations did we create?" Hargrove chuckled. 17, and you hammered him with contempt charges 3 times until he was broke when he attempted to fight it in court. The businessman Crane Ever guided the discussion to the potential of the present. We must expedite Oak Lane acquisitions now that the federal court is no longer involved. Within 30 days, I would like the demolition to start. The impatience of my investors is growing. Hargrove described how officers were instructed to target particular houses who refused to sell, fabricating charges that would result in penalties, court hearings, backass, and ultimately financial exhaustion. The recording included clear talks of their methods. Crawford clarified that he used his judicial authority to authorize liens, foreclosures, and expedited property transfers, in addition to making sure that any legal challenges were promptly dismissed. Most unsettlingly, the topic of discussion shifted to earlier people who had tried to reveal their actions. Johnson, whose name I believe was Crawford, was a community leader 5 years ago, began interviewing residents of Oak Lane regarding class action lawsuits. Hargrove gave a nod. It needed to be attended to. That terrible road collision is a disgrace. Eleanor learned vital information regarding the extent to which the conspirators would go to safeguard their plan, from the allegation that they were involved in the death of a possible whistleblower. The evidence in this audio alone is enough for federal prosecution. But Eleanor kept accumulating more evidence to create a strong case that would not be subject to political meddling or procedural objections. Eleanor uncovered a number of important discoveries during this stage of her inquiry. She discovered, thanks to Officer Daniels' ongoing cooperation, that Judge Crawford and Chief Hargrove had been running their corruption plan for more than 15 years. Focusing not only on Oak Lane, but also on any black-owned property that Crane or his business associates deemed suitable for development. Numerous families had been forced to relocate, historic businesses had been destroyed, and cultural sites that were important to Westbrook's black community had been erased as a result of the systematic prejudice. The links Daniels assisted in establishing between the conspiracy and 3 mysterious deaths during the previous 10 years all of which involved people who had started to inquire about discriminatory trends in property seizures, were the most unsettling. The circumstances implied foul play covered up as accidents or medical situations, even though none had been formally labeled as homicides. Tasha, who had lost her job as a result of police interference, worked discreetly with Eleanor to establish workplace harassment as she filed a federal case that needed evidence preservation. Because of this calculated filing, employment documents that would later be crucial in proving the harassing pattern were spared from destruction. In a similar vein, she kept in touch with Marcus via his family, learning of his most recent incarceration and assembling evidence for malicious prosecution. Most importantly, Eleanor found 7 additional victims of comparable discriminatory treatment who were prepared to speak in spite of their fears of reprisals. Together, their contributions to the puzzle showed how widespread Westbrook's systemic prejudice was. In order to keep information inside reliable channels and prevent it from leaking back to Westbrook officials, Eleanor used her judicial authority to launch a sealed federal probe. All records were kept in secure federal facilities rather than in potentially vulnerable local offices as part of the investigation's extreme procedures. Unaware of the growing evidence against him, Victor Crane acted to quicken his expansion plans as Eleanor's case approached its inevitable conclusion. After the 48-hour notice period ended, demolition equipment showed up close to Patricia's community center, ready for quick action. Final eviction letters were sent to Oak Lane property owners. Many of them had deadlines that were outside state law, but they were signed by Judge Crawford. Eleanor responded to this acceleration with a legal countermove that bought crucial time for the collection of conclusive evidence while confusing the conspirators. Citing an ongoing civil rights investigation, she won an emergency federal injunction, stopping all demolition and eviction proceedings in Oak Lane by using her federal jurisdiction through an associate judge, while she was legally recused. The injunction immediately caused uncertainty and anxiety among the conspirators because it mentioned an investigation that Crawford, Hargrove, and Crane thought had been abandoned. Growing paranoia was evident in their response, which was recorded by the surveillance equipment. Mitchell recused herself from the probe that Crawford requested at an urgent meeting in his chambers. The discrimination investigation was put on hold by the Justice Department. Hargrove walked tensely. The use of another judge as a front while she pulls strings behind the scenes could be a ruse. Crane, more realistic, concentrated on pressing issues. We must swiftly contain it, whatever it is. $50 million has been invested in this development by my investors. We cannot tolerate delays. Crawford suggested that they needed more long-term answers to the Mitchell problem, and their conversation shifted to Eleanor herself. Eleanor's assessment of the threat they posed was validated by this alarming development, which also expedited her intervention schedule. Officer Daniels sent Eleanor an urgent warning over their secure channel within hours after this taped exchange. They are preparing an attack on you. Hargrove summoned Rollins and Bennett to a private meeting. They were gathering surveillance gear and inspecting an unmarked car when they emerged. Eleanor used this information to prepare for the final step in her plan, a controlled confrontation that would make the conspirators fully reveal themselves while protecting her. She established a secure communication protocol and called trusted federal marshals to inform them of the changing threat. In order to protect her sister from reprisals, she made arrangements for Patricia to temporarily move to a secure area outside of Westbrook. Above all, she braced herself for what she believed would be the last desperate attempt by the conspirators to harm her, an action that would ultimately determine their doom. Everything was set up for Eleanor's last move in her well-planned plan. A confrontation that would either put her in real danger or reveal and destroy Westbrook's corrupt power system. Eleanor thought about how a straightforward traffic stop, driven by racial bias, had exposed a decades-long conspiracy that affected countless lives and was shielded by officials sworn to enforce the very laws they routinely broke as she finished getting ready. The extent of the corruption only made her more determined to see justice served, not only for herself, but also for all the victims of Westbrook's discriminating tactics who lacked the means and standing to successfully defend themselves. The ideal location for Eleanor's trap was the deserted Wilson estate on the side of Oak Lane. The historic building, which had formerly housed Westbrook's first black doctor, was now deserted, another victim of the town's discriminatory policies. The property was encircled by dense woods on 3 sides, providing cover for the federal marshals Eleanor had placed in strategic locations around the property. Eleanor parked her car in the circular driveway as dusk descended over the unkempt yard, not trying to blend in. Knowing that the conspirators' surveillance would soon pick up on her movements, she had set up a reliable journalist to leak information about a meeting between herself and a confidential informant at this place. As she entered the house and positioned herself in what had been a sophisticated front parlor, the ancient porch groaned beneath her feet. Earlier that day, 4 covert cameras had been set up, covering the entire area and sending their footage to a secure federal facility. Knowing that patience would be her ally in the impending encounter, Eleanor looked at her watch. She had made the conscious decision not to carry a firearm because she knew that giving the impression that she was threatening someone would damage her case in court. She waited only a moment. As a motorist gently parked behind her automobile to prevent any possible escape, headlights streamed across the room's worn wallpaper. Eleanor watched through the dusty glass as Officers Rollins and Bennett got out of an unmarked police car, their bodies displaying stress as they looked around the premises. Hands resting on their holstered pistols, they approached the home with the hyperbolic caution of men anticipating trouble. Without a knock, the front door opened, and both cops stepped inside, their spotlights scanning the dark interior until they spotted Eleanor standing quietly in the middle of the room. Judge Mitchell Rollins' tone was mockingly stiff at first, an intriguing location for a meeting. Bennett, who intended to purchase this dump, stood close to the door, obstructing the only way out as Rollins entered the room. When Eleanor answered, she remained calm and her voice steady. "Rollins, Bennett, and the officers. Chief Hargrove is probably aware of your presence." Both men were clearly uneasy with the inquiries that implied knowledge of their coordinated conduct. Rollins bounced back fast, a grin emerging as he walked around the room. "We're just patrolling as usual. There have been break-ins at this property. Imagine how shocked we were to discover a federal judge intruding." Eleanor took the chance to steer the discussion. "It's fascinating to me that out of all the empty homes in Westbrook, you pay close attention to those on Oak Lane, particularly those whose proprietors have declined to sell to Victor Crane." The mention of Crane in particular caused an instant response, with Bennett and Rollins sharing a brief look that verified their relationship with the developer. "Don't know what you're talking about," Rollins said in a tone that was easygoing but belied his escalating aggression. "However, since you raised the issue, there have been worries expressed of a federal judge abusing her power by pestering local leaders and leveling unfounded accusations." As Rollins approached, purposefully encroaching on Eleanor's personal space, she stayed still. "Judge Crawford is actually quite worried about your mental health. Perhaps you witness prejudice where there is only excellent police work because of the stress of your job." The reference to Crawford reaffirmed the legal link between her harassment and the court. One more piece of evidence that was recorded by the covert cameras. Eleanor persisted in her plan to elicit more direct confessions. I have proof that the police department, Judge Crawford's court, and Victor Crane's development business engaged in systematic discrimination against Black Oak Lane property owners. At last, Bennett's voice was tight with rage. Proof, such as the word of troublemakers and criminals. No one will trust them over a county judge and well-respected officers. Eleanor kept her gaze on Rollins, whose closeness had grown blatantly menacing. Financial documents demonstrating Crane's payments to Hargrove's relatives in tandem with an increase in Oak Lane enforcement activities. Officers were instructed by internal police emails to target particular properties that turned down Crane's offers. Testimony from several people who were falsely accused. My own arrest's dashboard camera footage inexplicably vanished from official documents. Eleanor could see the officers' realizations that her investigation had gone deeper than they had thought possible as she enumerated each item. Rollins' tone suddenly changed from jesting to threatening. You seem to have been quite busy, too occupied. That might be viewed by some as interfering with police operations. Dangerous pastime, particularly in an unfamiliar town. Between them, the disguised menace lingered. Eleanor answered coolly. I have a perfect understanding of Westbrook Rollins, officer. I can see how Bennett and you use fictitious traffic stops to target black residents. How Oak Lane's Chief Hargrove distributes compensation according to citations and arrests. How Judge Crawford expedites evictions and rejects complaints. How 3 people died under strange circumstances after asking too many questions regarding your organization. Both cops were clearly taken aback when the death toll was mentioned. Rollins' hand moved to rest on his weapon as Bennett took a step forward. With a threatening whisper in his voice, Judge Rollins remarked, You should be very careful about making accusations like that. Here, accidents are common among those who push too hard. Similar like Johnson, the community organizer from a few years ago. I remember a tragic brake failure. Eleanor had been trying to get the admission that was caught on several recording devices. In spite of the growing danger, she pushed harder while keeping her cool, and this house's original owner, Dr. Wilson. Rollins laughed at another mishap. A chilly, unhumorous sound. Heart attack. Very depressing. However, his health was likely exacerbated by the stress of battling all those code infractions. He drew even nearer. His tactics of intimidation are clearly obvious. Federal judges also have mishaps. You know, isolated roads, a single car accident. It occurs frequently. Eleanor firmly looked into his eyes. Has that been decided by Victor Crane and Judge Crawford, that I must be involved in an accident? The purpose of the straight query was to elicit a clear link between the officers and their other conspirators. Bennett moved uneasily, but Rollins had become too sure of himself. Crawford believes you need to be dealt with since you're turning into a liability. Crane has ideas for development that aren't waiting for court cases. Hargrove concurs that Westbrook would benefit more from your absence. Rollins was verifying the plot Eleanor had meticulously documented with every word. He then purposefully pulled out his handgun and pointed it squarely at Eleanor, intensifying the conflict to its most perilous moment. Judge Mitchell, this is how it ends. You made the decision to meet an informant at a deserted house in a neighborhood with a high crime rate. Unfortunately, you became aggressive and threatening when cops responded to trespassing reports. Tragic errors were committed in the confrontation that followed. Very depressing. However, these events occur when federal officials encroach on local affairs. Even with the rifle pointed at her, Eleanor remained remarkably composed. You also think that Story will withstand a government inquiry. Rollins responded with icy assurance, pressing the revolver against her temple. Reenacting the moment from Eleanor's first hook. What inquiry? We have a record of your recusal. Following Crawford's announcement of his worries regarding your mental soundness, your reputation will be called into doubt. Any proof you have gathered will be written off as the compulsive collecting of a disturbed mind. Not so high and mighty now, are you? He said mockingly, the gun still held against her head. It was the exact time Eleanor had expected to see the overt threat and acknowledgement of the larger scheme, caught on several tapes. In response, she used 3 words that completely altered the situation. Now, with federal marshals there, the room erupted into controlled mayhem as marshals rushed through windows and doors while brandishing their firearms and yelling orders. Rollins had honestly thought the location was unnoticed, as evidenced by the fact that he was disarmed and confined before he could react to the horror on his face. Bennett was swiftly caught outside the residence after attempting to escape. Despite the weapon that had been placed against her head just moments before, Eleanor maintained her composure as the marshals secured the area, displaying years of judicial discipline in her unflinching manner. Coordinated federal teams carried out search warrants at Crane's offices and the police station courtroom in Westbrook at the same time. When Rollins and Bennett were known to be in prison, the activities were timed perfectly to avoid any chance of destroying the evidence. Chief Hargrove responded in a panic at the police station, locking himself in his office and trying to destroy records. When a number of junior officers, including Daniels, refused to back their leader, the almost hour-long standoff came to an end. Judge Crawford was arrested as he was trying to leave the jurisdiction. He had offshore banking paperwork and a hurriedly packed luggage, which further demonstrated his guilt consciousness. At Crane Development Headquarters, Eleanor personally accompanied federal officials in the most dramatic scene. Despite the late hour, Crane's security staff was busy shredding documents when they arrived. When federal officials produced the search warrant, Crane insisted on having a private conversation with Eleanor, which she complied with while agents stood outside the door of his opulent office. There's no need for this. Judge Mitchell Crane started by replacing the charm of his developer with calculating coldness. Both of us are experts who know how the world functions. Decide on a price. His despair became apparent when Eleanor stayed mute. $1 million. $5 million. A foundation in your name that has the money you need. There is no need for this to turn into a public spectacle. They measured Eleanor's reaction. For decades, she had been revered in federal courtrooms because of the authority in her voice. You are under investigation, Mr. Crane, for possible accessory to murder, fraud, official corruption, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. No amount of money could eliminate the charges. Crane's voice rose as he made one last desperate offer, and his facade fell apart. Tonight, $10 million. Cash offshore accounts can be set up however you like. Judge, everyone has a cost. Which is yours? Eleanor stood, indicating that they had finished talking. Mr. Crane, justice is not for sale in my courtroom, not at any cost. Do you know who I know? He hissed as he grabbed her arm as she turned to go. This will never get to trial because of my connections. As soon as they arrived, federal officers took his hand away and arrested him. Journalists who had gathered outside the building after Patricia informed them of the important law enforcement activity were able to catch the moment. The picture of Victor Crane being led in handcuffs out of his offices became the obvious representation of the corruption that was revealed in Westbrook. As the early arrests turned into a full-scale operation later that evening, Eleanor went to the local jail where Marcus was being kept on false pretenses. As she walked toward his cell with federal marshals holding release papers, the young man's face changed from one of resignation to one of shock. Is this authentic? As the cell door opened, he questioned, tears welling up in his eyes. Eleanor attested to the fact that it is real, and your evidence made it possible. She paid Tasha a similar visit and informed her that her former employer had been charged with federal employment discrimination for firing her on police orders. As Eleanor described how her bravery in sharing her experience had helped to reveal the larger pattern of discrimination, the young woman started crying. Tasha wiped away her tears and said, "I never thought anyone would believe us over them. Most people wouldn't be able to defend themselves." Eleanor gave a cordial handshake. "That's precisely why those of us who possess that ability need to make use of it. This was more than simply my experience. It was about the things that have been happening to you all for years." The first news stories about the FBI operation that had uncovered years of institutionalized corruption and discrimination started airing as dawn dawned over Westbrook. From Patricia's living room, Eleanor observed the announcement of preliminary charges against 15 people, including the 3 main conspirators, as well as several officers and officials who had helped to make their plan possible. The television displayed video of evidence being taken out of Crane's corporate headquarters, Chief Hargrove's office, and Judge Crawford's chambers. The most striking image was of Oak Lane residents assembling outside the community center, which had been spared demolition due to a federal injunction. Many of them were crying and embracing, realizing the system that had enslaved them for so long. At last, Long was being disassembled. The conflict that started with a discriminatory traffic stop had developed into one of the most important civil rights investigations in the state's recent history, exposing not only isolated instances of prejudice, but a whole system intended to deny people their property and rights on the basis of race. Eleanor recognized that the task of restoring trust and establishing true justice in Westbrook was only getting started, but she was relieved that the crucial first step of accountability had been completed. In just 6 months, Westbrook was completely changed. As Judge Eleanor Mitchell drove slowly around the neighborhood, taking in the subtle and significant changes since that fatal traffic stop last spring, she noticed that Oak Lane was painted in vivid gold and crimson by the autumn leaves. The most obvious change was at the police station's entrance, where a new sign said that the Westbrook Police Department was now practicing community-oriented policing under new leadership. There has been a complete remodeling inside their walls. Chief Hargrove was currently incarcerated in a federal prison for 20 years after being found guilty of conspiracy, civil rights violations, and tampering with corruption evidence. A reputable retired state police commander with experience in community policing reforms served as the department's interim leader while it was under federal supervision. Working with the new administration, Officer Daniels, whose pivotal testimony had helped open the case, implemented training reforms that addressed implicit bias recognition and constitutional policing standards. There had been equally dramatic alterations at the courthouse. After being denied bail for his attempted flight and the discovery of offshore accounts set up to conceal the revenues from the corruption plot, Judge Crawford awaited trial on a number of federal offenses. Westbrook's court procedures were temporarily overseen by visiting judges from other jurisdictions until new judicial leadership could be established through a special election. Where Crane's luxury complex was planned, the most striking physical change was seen. Following the discovery of extensive fraud across his business empire by federal probes, the once dominant developer filed for bankruptcy. His Oak Lane Square proposal had been put on hold for good, and the land was now being renovated as part of a community-led project Patricia was supporting. Eleanor stopped in front of the community center, which was now humming with activity as locals engaged in planning meetings for neighborhood renewal. Inside, she discovered Patricia leading volunteers. Despite the difficulties of the previous months, Patricia seemed to have boundless enthusiasm. Eleanor came in, and Patricia announced that our application had been accepted by the Historical Society. In order to shield them from the pressures of future development, the Wilson House and 5 other original Oak Lane properties will be designated as historical landmarks. Many of the people in the room were recognized. Tasha, who is currently working as the center's program coordinator, chaired a committee that looked at community economic development prospects. As Marcus got ready for his first semester of law school, Eleanor assisted senior citizens with the application process for subsidies for property rehabilitation. With silent delight, Eleanor watched their work, seeing how hardship had become opportunity for these young leaders. As they toured the building, Patricia said the FBI inquiry continues to grow. 3 additional municipalities have been found to have comparable trends. Your task force is creating a lot of buzz. Perhaps Eleanor's greatest professional accomplishment from the Westbrook case was her participation in the special federal task team that looked at prejudice tendencies in small communities. Investigators have found similar conspiracies in other jurisdictions where law police, municipal officials, and developers collaborated to systematically relocate minority neighborhoods through discriminatory techniques, using Westbrook as a model. Eleanor's activities had had a mixed effect on her career. She became too personally involved in the case, according to some federal judiciary colleagues, who condemned her for what they saw as going beyond the bounds of traditional judicial authority. Others commended her bravery for utilizing her position to confront institutional injustice that could have otherwise gone unpunished, especially those with experience in civil rights legislation. During Eleanor's confirmation hearing for promotion to the Circuit Court of Appeals, a post for which she had been nominated prior to the Westbrook event, but which was now under more scrutiny, these opposing viewpoints clashed. As Eleanor answered the last question from Senator Richardson, who had been very critical of her tactics, the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing chamber fell silent. Judge Mitchell, your direct involvement in what was effectively a sting operation against local leaders has many of us concerned. Some might contend that this is more judicial activism than the restraint that the federal court is supposed to exhibit. How would you react, Eleanor, to accusations that you went above your authority as a judge? Knew that her response would probably affect the outcome of her confirmation, so she gave the question considerable thought before answering. I swore as a senator to protect the Constitution and provide equal rights under the law. I had to decide whether to utilize my positional authority to address the injustice when I personally encountered and watched systemic violations of constitutional rights committed by individuals sworn to enforce the law, or to turn a blind eye, since doing so may be contentious. She stopped and turned to face the committee members. In addition to providing abstract legal interpretation, the judicial branch works to guarantee that all individuals, regardless of their status, wealth, or color, receive the same level of justice. The federal judiciary has both the power and the duty to step in when those in charge of local government plot to deny citizens their constitutional rights on the basis of race. Residents of Westbrook, including several from Oak Lane, had gathered in the gallery behind her to watch the session. Beyond legal jargon, their presence highlighted the case's human significance. I saw not isolated instances of prejudice in Westbrook, but rather a systematic system intended to deny people their property and rights on the basis of color alone. As had happened with every prior attempt to address these infractions, the evidence would have been destroyed. Witnesses would have been intimidated, and justice would have been denied if I had completely recused myself and referred the case through the proper procedures. Eleanor's tone was calm, yet her conviction was unwavering. The judicial oath, in my opinion, calls on us to aggressively defend constitutional principles, not just in convenient situations, but particularly when doing so calls for bravery and personal risk. Perhaps we should re-evaluate our expectations of those in charge of the judiciary if defending individuals' fundamental rights is regarded as activism. After she was done, there was silence in the hearing room for a few moments. With an inscrutable face, Senator Richardson wrote something on his pad. A thin majority vote was used to affirm Eleanor's nomination to the Circuit Court 3 weeks after the committee adjourned without making a decision. After being confirmed, Eleanor visited Westbrook one last time before starting her new job a month later. Without fear or trepidation, she drove around town, observing the courteous nods she received from Reform Department officers. She went to the revitalized community center, where architectural drawings depicting the neighborhood's future were juxtaposed with images documenting its past. The history of Oak Lane, including the recent fight against discrimination and the community's eventual triumph, was recounted in a recently installed exhibition in the center's main hall, a section honoring allies in the struggle for justice, which featured her own photo next to Patricia's and that of others who had helped the community, impacted Eleanor in an unexpected way. Marcus came over with a handful of students from the Young Leadership program he had started as she was about to depart. "Would you mind talking to our group, Judge Mitchell, after what transpired here? Several of them are thinking about pursuing legal careers." Eleanor spent an hour with the students, addressing their inquiries about the legal system and expressing her conviction that, when applied with bravery and moral character, the law can be a potent force for good. A young woman posed the query that Eleanor had thought about numerous times during the last few months. Would anyone have taken you seriously or supported you when you were mistreated by the cops if you hadn't been a federal judge? Eleanor probably didn't accept the unpleasant reality. For this reason, those of us in positions of power must make use of it to guarantee justice for those without it. Any legal system's ability to defend the weak is its true test, not how it handles the powerful. Tasha, who was now in charge of a police department community oversight committee, had a private meeting with Eleanor before she left. "Next week, we will be interviewing candidates for the position of permanent chief," Tasha announced with pride. "In addition to providing advising advice, the committee really has control over the selecting process." The most significant result of the Westbrook transition was her shift from terrified prisoner to self-assured community leader. Eleanor passed the town's entry sign, which now had a newly added slogan beneath the population figure, "Where justice matters for everyone," as she drove out from Westbrook for the last time before starting her new judicial post. The straightforward addition demonstrated a commitment to a more just future, while also acknowledging previous shortcomings. Eleanor thought about how a biased traffic stop had revealed a whole rotten system in addition to personal prejudice, which in turn had opened the door for real change. The path to justice was rarely clear-cut or straightforward, requiring the bravery of common people like Tasha and Marcus, who dared to speak the truth, and the dedication of advocates like Patricia, who documented patterns that others preferred, as well as the determination of insiders like Officer Daniels, who put their conscience before complicity, and, on occasion, the willingness of those in positions of authority to jeopardize their jobs by standing firmly for constitutional principles. Has this story altered your perspective on discrimination and the structures that occasionally allow it to occur? To view more content examining significant social topics, please hit the like button and subscribe if you think everyone should be treated equally under the law, regardless of their background or position. Tell this story to someone who could value a compelling illustration of justice triumphing against institutional corruption. Would you like to hear more bravery tales about discrimination? Share your ideas or experiences in the comments section below. I appreciate you being a part of one judge's fight for justice in Westbrook. And keep in mind that one person's refusal to accept injustice, even when doing so puts them in danger, is frequently the first step toward positive change. This narrative illustrates how racism frequently functions through organized structures of power rather than individual instances. Not only did Judge Mitchell face personal discrimination when she was pulled over, but she also came across a whole system that was set up to systematically persecute black residents in order to safeguard wealth and power. It's a significant lesson. Addressing both individual instances of discrimination and the systems that support them is necessary for true justice. Concentrating power among individuals who misuse it without consequence makes it hazardous. Because they controlled all local redress channels, Crawford, Hargrove, and Crane established a closed system that allowed them to violate rights without consequence. This shows us that in order to stop corruption, accountability systems need to be in place at several levels. The bravery of those who put everything on the line to fight injustice is as significant. Transformation needed regular people to make remarkable decisions. From Officer Daniels risking his job to Tasha and Marcus fearing retaliation, their behavior serves as a reminder that systems only undergo change when their constituents decide to stop being complicit. Lastly, the narrative teaches that privilege comes with accountability. Judge Mitchell had the option to utilize her position only to avoid being mistreated personally. Rather, she acknowledged her special capacity to reveal malfeasance that, in the absence of her resources and authority, had hurt many others. Utilizing privilege to elevate people without it is a sign of true leadership. Have you ever been unable to stop bigotry that you witnessed? Or maybe you've been in a situation when you could have spoken up but held back out of concern for the repercussions. This narrative serves as a reminder that justice frequently rests on the bravery of common people who are prepared to oppose established structures. In order to help this story reach others who might find strength in Judge Mitchell's example, please hit the like button if it spoke to you. For more stirring stories of regular people facing great injustice in America and abroad, subscribe to our channel. If you were Judge Mitchell or Officer Daniels, how would you have responded? Was it necessary to risk everything in order to do the right thing? Leave a comment below with your opinions. Someone else who must make a comparable moral decision might find inspiration in your viewpoint. We appreciate you coming along on our journey through the fight against entrenched racism in the community. By telling these tales, we want to encourage the bravery required to build a society in which everyone, regardless of color, socioeconomic background, or social standing, can live in justice. In the meantime, keep in mind that systemic change frequently starts with one individual standing up to injustice, even if doing so puts them in danger.